Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to The Grove, my somewhat weekly broadcast. This is my chance to be able to connect with you and share with you some of my practices, some of my beliefs, and a chance for us to come together as a community. Today, we are going to be discussing the Wiccan Rede, or as many of you may know it, and harm it none, do what thou wilt, or harm none, do what you will. There are a lot of different iterations of it, and we are going to get into the gist of that today. I couldn't help but be drawn to this particular topic because of, I believe I was watching. Oh, I don't know, one of those culty shows, or maybe it was just a commercial for the Mayfair Witches or something, which I love. Don't get me wrong, I love anything by Anne Rice. And I was like, boy, man, they make it seem like we put all these curses on people and whatnot. And while there may be magical practitioners that feel okay with that, many of us neo-pagan witches and Wiccans don't really ascribe to that, but I'm going to go into a deeper discussion of that with all of you in just a moment. But what I'd like to do, as usual, is I'd like to start the show with a reading from the Book of One. And I got lucky. Somehow we figured out a way to show you the book and give you a QR code so you can find it. But I'll just leave that up there while I'm reading so I don't have to try to hold it up in front of the blue screen, which you can never see. Anyway, let's start. This one is chapter 6, and it's called The Wise Fool. What is a fool but a wise man who is foolish? What is ugly but beauty disfigured? A fool does not find or understand his wisdom. Ugliness cannot find beauty within itself. Therefore, to look within is to be wise and beautiful. And I picked that one today because there is how should we say, there's a lot to take in there in reference to what we're going to be talking about. Let me get this out of my way again. Anyway, if you get a chance, please, the book is available on Amazon. You're welcome to scan the code and grab it. Anyway, let's get that out of the way so I can get started. Okay. And I want to pull up the chat because I didn't do that yet. Okay, great. So, whatchamacallit? What was I saying? We're talking about the Wiccan Rede. Okay, so I thought I'd start by sharing why it means so much to me and the reason why uh, I base my ethical and moral foundation on this principle and have for since 92, 93. And mind you, I was in my early 20s when I discovered the Rede, harm none, do what you will. So it has changed quite a bit as I've grown older, a little more mellow. And so my definition definitely has changed over the years, over the decades. But it was interesting for me, especially someone being in my early 20s. I had, prior to my Vision Quest era, which is about 92, I had always had a fascination with magic and witchcraft. And I won't go into the whole autobiography of my experiences with witchcraft and magic. However, I had never heard of Wicca until probably my late teens, early 20s. And the first book I picked up was Scott Cunningham's Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner. And that's where I discovered the Wiccan Rede. Now, I believe he frames the wording a little bit more simply, like harm none, do what you will, which is kind of what I always say. If you're on any of my social media pages, you'll notice I'll usually end with that when I'm trying to make a point about something, whether it be political or relationships or anything like that. It's like, well, you're free to do as you will, so long as you harm none. Now, as an early 20, I was like 22, 23. Here I am. I'm just starting to discover magic and witchcraft and all of these things. And, I was still trying to get a grip around my identity, my sexual identity as a gay man, and also converting from being raised Catholic and converting into paganism, or at that point, Wicca. And I think a lot of us start off with Wicca, but anyway, that's here nor there. The reality of it is that, this idea of complete freedom to do and be what you want to be, do what you want to do, was very, very appealing to me. The idea, as I read more about Wicca and witchcraft, of course, the young college aged, frat boy aged neophyte was like, oh, so fertility cult and sex orgies and rituals and all that. I'm like, oh, okay, I can get down with this. And I was a little bit let down as I moved into it, but maybe, maybe not. However, that's a story for another day. But with that being said, that idea of harm none, do it thou wilt, was truly very, very empowering for me. It gave me permission to kind of let go of the social programming that I was given through my family, through my church, through my social circles and whatnot, and to have that freedom to be who you are and to behave as you choose with respect to others really made a lot of sense to me. That idea of I can do, again, I'm talking about a 22-year-old mind here. I can do whatever I want as long as I'm not hurting anybody, you know. But there were some repercussions that come with that. There were some backlash when it comes to that, because in that young mind, I didn't think of it as no harming myself. Smoking, drinking, partying, all night long with my friends. Frat party type things, to put it PG wise. But the reality of it is that, as I got older, I realized, self care is a part of it. And, to this day, I'm still learning how important self care is. Again, that's a whole nother show. But back to the read. Um, about that time, I was studying Joseph Campbell. I was very lucky that now we're talking about the early 90s. I was living in Dunedin, Florida, which is a suburb of Clearwater, St. Pete area. And I was very lucky that our cable access channel used to show Joseph Campbell Harvard lectures every day, I believe. I'm guessing there was a course somewhere locally, like one of the colleges, where maybe it was a mythology course or a writing course. I'm not even sure what it was, but I watched them. I watched him, daily, religiously. And there I discovered, and through watching him, and turned out that my partner at the time, we may or may not have been living together, was a huge Joseph Campbell fan, and he turned me on to The Power of Myth and Bill Moyers and that whole series. And I believe it was in that series that he talks about the meaning of the word thou, and how it changed as a society, as we changed. Back in the olden days, people would say, "How art thou?" How, thou. The point of it is that he said, this is Campbell's, and this is my paraphrasing Joseph Campbell. He's been dead since the 80s, so he can't even stand up for himself today. But if you look it up on one of his courses, I'm sure he'll bring it up. But he says that when we say, "How are you?" the psychological impact is very different, because "how are you" usually has to do with our story. I talk about the personal story, this identity. You can call it the ego. You can call it, the external identity that's been thrust upon us, et cetera, et cetera. But when you say the word thou, Campbell states that thou meant your essence, your soul. I kind of bring it together with the word. I see it as a parallel word for like when we say namaste. The spirit in me acknowledges the spirit in you, whereas how art thou would kind of reiterate the same way using Western vernacular. But and I bring this up because the original Wiccan Rede, uh, written by Doreen Valiente, or at least it's been attributed to her, and I'll get into that in just a second, was, and it harm none, do what thou will or wilt. I forgot which one or the other. And so that made that changed the dynamic of the read for me as well. It was like, okay, do what thou wilt. Okay, so thou meaning my soul, my spirit, my essence, my higher self. All these words came rushing to me as far as what that meant. And so there I had another little change of what that word meant to me, or what that phrase meant to me. Now, mind you, I'm just gonna put it out there now about the I have to do the disclaimer. I am a neo-pagan shamanic practitioner, Reiki master, etc., etc. These are my experiences and my experiences only. You can explore it and take what you will, leave the rest, as they say. But anyway, so my understanding is that Doreen Valiente actually wrote the read when she was working with Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner being the father of Gardnerian Wicca, or quite honestly, of what you would consider modern Wicca. That's all I'll say about that. That's just a little history lesson. So lo and behold, I matured. I started going through my initiation, started studying more. I began practicing more shamanic principles. And, I kind of I don't want to say I outgrew Wicca so much, as it was so hard to find any Wiccans in Central Florida. But it didn't matter, because I was so fascinated by the Egyptian mystery schools, as well as shamanic practices, as well as Eastern philosophy and Buddhism. And I was a sponge. I was absorbing the Bhagavad Gita, the life of Buddha. I was studying shamanic journeys. I actually did a shamanic vision quest, as my book is all about. And I settled on eclectic pagan, moving, now in my modern age, I'm an eclectic pagan, high priest, shamanic practitioner, because I do incorporate a little bit of everything. I was very drawn to Celtic and and all those things. Little to find out, last year or the year before, many of I was adopted. I found out just 2 years ago that I'm Seminole and Irish. And I was like, well, no wonder I'm drawn to shamanic and Celtic magic, indigenous spiritual work. But anyway, so as I got older, around the late 90s, 2000s, I ended up moving back to South Florida. I take that back. I moved to South Florida in the mid 90s. And I got involved with the Unitarian Fellowship of South Florida and CUPS, Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans. I ended up running it. I was a lay minister for the church. And I remember having a discussion with a young student, for lack of a better term, a young man who was a member of our CUPS group. And he said, well, I don't agree with your interpretation of the Wiccan Rede, that harm none, do what you will. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you said that harm is what other people think it is. He's like, I think that if I don't think I'm harming somebody, that this doesn't go against a Rede. I was like, hold up. Now, here is where we kind of get into some gray area. And I don't even want to say gray area, but some areas that need to be kind of better defined. So when we're talking about harm, there is a difference between hurting someone and harming someone. For example, when let's say you're in a crappy relationship and you decide to end that relationship, you're going to hurt them. It's not intentional in the sense of, that is kind of where that whole play, and I believe that's what this young man was trying to state was, okay, well, they think I'm hurting them by breaking up with them, so does that mean I should stay with them? And I'm like, oh, okay, I see where the confusion is. Harm goes on a deeper level, and I believe that harm, for me, is something that is intentional. As a matter of fact, I've got a great example for y'all with the modern world and the LGBTQIAPPP XYZ community. For example, let's say there's someone of an older generation that still doesn't quite understand pronouns. Hell, I'm one of those people that still don't get pronouns. I've just gotten used to saying the word they. I'm like, oh, just say they, so you don't get it wrong. But I work for a LGBT community center part-time, and I'm there as a facilities director and working with them now for 12 years. And I don't want to harm anybody, but I see what happens a lot with the older generation, and I find myself always having to correct them. I'm like, no, they've identified themselves as female. You have to respect their pronouns. And I don't want to turn this into a political thing. I'm just trying to give you an example of intentional harm. So, or somebody thinks is harm. So when someone says to you, I identify as he, me, for example, I identify as he, and you, even though I've told you I identify as he, and you still call me she or they, that's being harmful. So there is a certain, if there's ignorance to it, I can't say that you're harming them intentionally. But once you know better and you do it anyway, as a matter of fact, I posted something about this today on my Facebook profile about making the same mistake a second time is a choice, and that is where this harm none part comes. If if your animal has, I don't know, a sore leg or something, you keep touching the leg, they let you know, don't touch my leg, and you're still doing it, that's harming. So it's fair to say that in my moral code, harm is not what I think is harm, but what other people think is harm. Now let's take this even deeper and take it a step further. One of my teachers back in the 90s, Reverend Rel Davis, who was the CUPS director, the leader of CUPS in South Florida before I took over, he had said, he goes, well, we were talking about the Wiccan Rede. Now, imagine this is like a Wednesday night at a CUPS group at the Unitarian Church, and we were talking about, the Wiccan Rede. And somebody said, oh, like the Golden Rule and the Bible. He was like, nope. And I'm like, we're all like, what do you mean? It's the same thing. He's like, no, not at all. I'm like, how is, what is it? Love thy neighbor as thyself, or I already forget what the Golden Rule is, or do unto others as you would have them do unto yourself. Okay, there we go. And he said, think about those words. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now imagine that being applied to a pedophile, a rapist, a murderer, a sexual deviant pervert, or something to that effect. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Do unto others, you would have them do unto you. Someone who's really messed up, that's not going to work. So I say, oh, okay. He goes, harm none, do what you will means you have the freedom to do whatever you want, but it's not about doing unto others the way you would do unto them. It's about you taking the initial responsibility, understanding what harm is for, the other person, your community. And this is where it gets a little tricky. We're looking at expanding it into community. We look at expanding it into our planet, to our family. little recently, I was having a discussion about when you're stuck trying to make a really tough decision, and sometimes we get put in a predicament where both choices are just someone's going to end up getting hurt. And I was speaking with somebody about it, and they're like, you have to make the choice that is most beneficial to all involved. And I was like, okay, well, that clarifies a little bit more. So harm none, do what you will. But if you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, pick one it's going to be beneficial to the most people. So let's take it to another level now. Boy, I didn't even think I was going to have this much in me on this topic, but I do. Let's take it to another level now. So let's talk about will. Do harm none, do what thou will. What is thou will? There's in Thelemic and or Golden Dawn and all these other occult brotherhoods and sisterhoods, there's this saying, do what thou wilt. But what is thou? As well, we always say, and I say it all the time, and as I do will it, so mote it be. Now I've kind of just cut it down to so mote it be, but I know in the back of my head it's as I do will it. But for me, it took me a while, again, decades of studying this philosophy, decades of studying different traditions, different cultures, and how they applied it in their practices and whatnot. And it turns out, and who would have thought it was Aleister Crowley that was going to give me the answer? The guy who kind of just really did whatever the heck he wanted, and usually to the detriment of himself and a few other people. But I believe it's in 777 or one of his other books. He said, listen, the will is not our lower will, it's our higher will. Our higher will, it comes from our higher self, or as he used to say, the conversation with the holy guardian angel, or our source consciousness. So when I think of harm none, do what thou will would be the will of the universe, the will of my higher self. So in other words, that would be the motivating factor. That's not to say that I can't, I don't know, have an orgy with 14 men if I wanted to. You know what I'm saying? Maybe that's what my will wants. The point of it is that if we are in alignment with our higher self, eventually we're not going to end up harming anybody, including ourselves. And that's what I got. That's where I kind of landed on. With that being said, let's face it. We live in a 3.5D consciousness. We live in the 3.5D plane, as we say. And there's going to be day-to-day things that you're going to want to do, that your friends are going to want you to do. There is a time for play. There's a time for being silly. There's a time for doing, things that aren't always going to be in alignment with your higher self or your source consciousness or thou will. But even in that, there comes a certain responsibility on this level of consciousness, that there comes a level of responsibility of the ripple effect. In paganism or in Wicca, they call it, the threefold law. In Eastern philosophy, there's karma. Well, John Lennon turned it into instant karma, which there is. But so when we are, I hate to do it, but I'm going to do it. I have to pull in Charmed. There was an episode of Charmed that I'm going to bring up now, where they talk about, actually, most of the show talks about, you can never do magic for for self-fulfillment or, whatever. And I don't agree with that. I do believe that we have the right to do magic to protect ourselves. I believe we have the right to do magic to bring prosperity to us, to heal ourselves, to heal people around us. But again, using that moral code of who is it going to hurt? Is it going to hurt anybody? Are the steps taken going to hurt anybody? So it's important to do that. Think of the fact that, those of us who have been doing this work for a while, and I know many of you out there who've been following me for a while, have looked into, things like The Secret and Law of Attraction, as well as one of my favorites was What the Bleep is Going On, quantum physics and whatnot, that, every action is going to have a reaction and a ripple effect going outward. So what harm none, do it thou will, for me, calls me to think about not just doing the act. Okay, so I'm trying to think of something that's going to affect more than one person. The only thing I can think of is having that brownie that's going to go to my hips. But let's say we're going to have a party with cannabis brownies, and it's going to affect the people at the party. Everyone there is there by their own free will and accord, but we have to think about, okay, well, Janie, she left her kid at home. She's going to have to go home and take care of that kid. She can't go home after eating that brownie. Or so and so, they got to go to work tomorrow. They can't be doing that. So it's kind of like, what is the ripple effect going to be? And just to get a very clear picture, I know it sounds like a lot. And I want to look up something I've pulled up that I want to share with you about this. So I'm just going to read this, and this is from an essay I found that this woman, I don't know, I'll pull up her name in a minute, but she says, taking thoughtful action is the tenet of the ethics of the Rede. In the context of prayer or your spell work, your action, as said above, should only be used for true need, not greed. See, I like that. Thank you. This feeling of responsibility to ethical practices, I've always felt very close to, and have been compelled to leave employment where the practices were unethical. Many pagans consciously ask permission for uprooting weeds. So there is a part that we can get carried away too far. There are, and don't get me wrong, I always ask permission to, I like to cut flowers in my yard. I won't necessarily ask permission, but I will thank it. I'll give it gratitude as I'm, snipping off the little pieces of evergreen or something to put in a bouquet. So acknowledging with consciousness. The reality of it is, I knew a gentleman who was afraid to step on ants because of the Wiccan Rede. So it can be taken too far. If it's done by accident, it's an accident. If you're going around to anthills and jumping up and down on them and die, that's harm. Don't make yourself too crazy to try to be too perfect. And I think this is kind of where I want to end today's talk, is that while we can hold ourselves to a higher standard ethically and morally, we can make ourselves lose our humanity when we try not to harm anything. Granted, when it comes to the products I buy, I try to buy from companies that aren't harming the planet or using, child slavery or things like that. That also, you have a lot of power with your money. Think of harm none, do what you will when it comes to spending your money. As well, the same thing goes with, the ecology of the planet, taking care of my neighborhood, those kinds of things. And in that regard, I cannot, if I try to be responsible for the entire neighborhood, the entire state, the entire country, the entire world, I'm just going to make myself crazy, and I'm just going to live under a rock and not move and become an ascetic. That's impossible. So I consciously do what I can to live in a way of what I call harm reduction. Of course, I might have to buy something from Nestle. I might, because that week I don't have money to buy certain foods. I'm going to buy some cheap lean cuisine, or actually lean cuisine isn't even cheap anymore. But, Don't make yourself crazy trying to be perfect. You will lose your humanity. You're going to hold yourself to a way too high standard. If you do find a certain balance where you can live in a way that everything you do is recyclable, everything you do is sustainable, everything you eat is well, again, sustainable. All the money you're spending does not go to any evil corporations. you know, good for you. Good for you. But do it one step at a time. I have learned to pick and choose my battles very carefully, especially when it comes to dealing with the outside world. You'll notice I will not do political debates on my social media anymore. It's not worth my aggravation. I have the right to feel what I feel. You have the right to feel what you feel. And somewhere in the middle lies the truth. And that's one thing I like about our magical code or moral code is everybody's right, but everybody's wrong. And every truth there's two stories, and so every truth is a half truth and a half false. So no matter what I think is true and you think is true, perhaps somewhere in the middle we're both half wrong. um, so don't make yourself crazy trying not to harm any single solitary thing. But I will say, on the other hand, it also gives us the opportunity not to judge other people. It is not my place to judge. It is not my place to tell other people how to live their lives. People have the right to listen to, oh, I don't know, country music, rap music, heavy metal music. You know what? They're not harming anybody. They might be harming their eardrums or, their soul or something. No, I'm kidding. That's just my 2 cents. But we can't judge people for their actions if they are not intentionally harming other people. Um, Now, on the other end of the spectrum, there are those that are imposing harm on others, are taking away people's rights and things like that. And yeah, I'm going to have a problem with that. And yes, I'm going to speak up about that. Uh, but of course, as a pagan and a lover of the earth and a lover of humanity, I'm going to stick up for the little guy. But as far as, they want to paint their house pink, who cares? They want to wear all purple clothing, who cares? They want to pierce their ears 18 times, who cares? It's not hurting anybody. And guess what? You have the right to do that too. So, harm none, do what you will is a wonderful, gives me a sense of freedom to be myself, but it also gives you that freedom in my eyes as well. You're not harming anybody. You're not vandalizing my home. You're not stealing from me. You can do whatever you want. You come after me. Of course, I'm going to want to protect my home and my safety or whatnot. But other than that, it's all preferences. It's all opinions. It really doesn't matter. Um, and I hope that this kind of clarifies a little bit about what the moral code is. Um, and again, this is my opinion. I have found that even though this came from Gardnerian witchcraft, it has spilled over into most of the Wiccan denominations. It has spilled over into eclectic paganism. It has spilled over into some magical orders and whatnot. Actually, there's a culmination. Crowley said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," and you can tell that Gardner and Valiente kind of borrowed from him. They're like, "No, harm none, do what you will," So it all kind of blends in together as far as historically and where the source of it all came from. However, I think in general, a majority of magical practitioners and witches and wizards are going to ascribe that moral code of harm none, do what you will. If you're not hurting anybody, do whatever you want. And if they're not hurting anybody, leave them alone. It's none of our business. Anyway, so with that said, I really got to wrap things up. I thought I'd be on 30 minutes, but I'm at 35 now. So I will see you all next week. I'm not quite sure what we're going to talk about next week, but I will definitely post something in the coming coming days, probably this weekend, you will see an event posted at least on my YouTube and on my Facebook. Let you know what we're going to be talking about next week. And let me say, before I go, I want to say hello to Miss Venom Doll on YouTube. Thank you. Hi, Terry. That's okay. A little late. You were 7 minutes. Not too bad. Anyway, I love you all. And please, by all means, let me pull out the QR code one more time if you'd like to get my book and learn more about really my philosophy, or at least the philosophy that my guides gave me from during my shamanic vision quest. I do read passages of it every week here on the show. So you can go ahead and find that on Amazon. And as well, please, if you can, feel free to tip me. You can click that QR code. I don't know where it is on your screen. Up in the corner, and it'll take you right over to my PayPal. If you want to throw a couple dollars in, that would be wonderful. And I thank you all so much. With that being said, have a wonderful, wonderful week. And again, I always love being here with y'all and spending time with y'all. I love you, my community. I love you so much. And I just can't believe all the years that we've been together, many of us, and how much we've taught each other. Because let me tell you, quite a few of you have taught me quite a few things. So I thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful week ahead. Bye now. I love you.